have to fear is
In war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. Wall Builders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. We've got a series for you, actually the longest series we've ever done here on Wall Builders Live. It's going to be a 6-part series on avoiding the historical traps of the left, done by David Barton. Powerful information and such a wealth of information. As I was looking at it and trying to cull it down to less than 6 programs, just impossible. Nothing in there that we wanted to lose. We want to bring all of that information to you. So we're going to start today. It'll be a 6-part program. You'll be able to get them all there at wallbuilderslive.com. Let's go join David Barton right now on avoiding the historical traps of the left.
I know we've got pastors here and attorneys and ambassadors and international attorneys. I'm going to try to do something for everyone and understand for the international folks it will be a whole lot of American history, but I think the principles will be applicable as well to any situation. Let me just start by reminding everybody that this is kind of a birthday time of the year, literally. We say happy birthday to America, 235 years, but also this year we say happy birthday to a particular document. There are a lot of historic Bibles. There's Geneva Bible, Douay Bible, the Bishop's Bible, but the one Bible to celebrate this year is the 400th anniversary of the King James Version of the Bible. The King James Version of the Bible actually has had a significant impact on America in a way that most people don't even recognize, particularly when you look at just our idioms, the way we talk. Do you know that right now, today, in modern America, we have 257 idioms that are strictly out of the King James? Let me just run a bunch of phrases by you. Every one of these is a Bible verse in the King James, and most of the people who use them don't have a clue that these are Bible verses. But for example, here's some. By the skin of your teeth, handwriting on the wall, from the cradle to the grave, a leopard can't change his spots, there's nothing new under the sun, signs of the times, thorn in the flesh, a fly in the ointment. Every one of those is a Bible verse. Now, it'd be fun. Next time you hear somebody say that, say, hey, do you know a Bible verse you just quoted? You know, they won't have a clue, but if you're going to ask them, you better know the answer before you ask it, too. So you better figure out what Bible verse. But the Bible has had a huge impact. It's also had a huge impact on things like literature. You take someone like William Shakespeare. You're aware of all the plays, dozens of plays that he wrote. 400 years ago he wrote plays, and we still use them today. We still use his plays. Hollywood makes movies out of them. They're still on Broadway, still very active 400 years later. And yet, strikingly, the dialogue in Shakespeare's plays, 2,000 Bible verses appear in his dialogue. Now, I'll guarantee you most of the actors that recite Shakespeare dialogue don't have an idea that a whole lot of what they're reciting is biblical verses, but that is literally it. Now, his 2,000 verses came out of the Geneva version of the Bible, but King James, Geneva, etc. Bible has really shaped who we are, and that's why John Quincy Adams, President of the United States, has a really great quote. I really like this quote that he said. He said, with regard to the history contained in the Bible, it's not so much praiseworthy to be acquainted with it as it is shameful to be ignorant of it. It's like we don't say, oh, you know the Bible, good for you. It's like, wow, you don't know the Bible? Ah, how pathetic. See, that's the reverse. Now, today we have it the other way around, but at the time he spoke that, back in the 1800s, that was the belief, is how can you not know the Bible? I mean, you can't be an educated person unless you, and that didn't have anything to do with you being religious or not. It had to do with fine arts and literature and history and government and economics and everything else. And because we thought it was such an important book, we especially had it in schools. Now, I'm not going to take time today to go through a lot of the history of education, history of educational laws, how religion fit in, when it changed, and where we are today. But I like what Zachary Taylor said. Nobody thinks of him as a religious individual. President Zachary Taylor, old rough and ready military hero that he was. This is what he said. He says, especially should the Bible be placed in the hands of the young. It is the best school book in the world. I would that all of our people were brought up under the influence of that holy book. Not because necessarily religious, but because of what it does in shaping culture, shaping life, shaping behavior. You know, quite frankly, you can look at the Ten Commandments, and I don't care if my neighbor is an atheist, quite frankly, I do as a Christian, I care, but as a citizen, I don't care if my neighbor's an atheist. But you know what? If he'll just conduct his life by the Ten Commandments and not kill me or steal my wife or take my property, he'll make a great neighbor, whether he's an atheist or Christian or whatever else. And so that was the belief we had. If you can live your life with the Golden Rule and the Good Samaritan, and that's why we had that as part of education forever. Now we've isolated out, and of course, having done that, it's cost a lot of our culture and habits and traditions and manners. I'll show you a quote later on. The Founding Fathers believed that every good manner had its root in the Bible, that all manners came out of the Bible. So the things that we do with please and yes ma'am and no ma'am and thank you and opening doors and pulling out chairs, they took all that back to Bible teachings on manners. That's still part of our cultural tradition today, particularly if you're in the South or the Southwest. We do a lot of that in the culture, but most people don't have a recognition that's out of the Bible. So you have those type of statements. There's also a great statement from Teddy Roosevelt on the Scripture. I like this statement. He says, almost every man who by his life work added to the sum of human achievement has based his life work largely upon the teachings of the Bible. He says, among the very greatest men, a disproportionately large number have been diligent and close students of the Bible at first hand. Now, I have a good friend who's a Jewish rabbi, considered one of the 50 most influential rabbis in America, Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and he undertook a study that took him 4 months. And he went back in those 4 months and looked at all the major inventions in the last 1,000 years. Everything that's elevated our lifestyle in the past 1,000 years, in technology and agriculture and science and medicine, education. Looked at everything, every life-changing invention, and he boiled all of those inventions down and then tracked them back to who formed them. And he found in his study that 98.5% of the world's life-changing inventions in the last 1,000 years have come at the hands of Christians. Now, the reason that is significant is because Christians have 32% of the world's population. Muslims have 21%, then you go to 14%, 6% Buddhist, Hindu. So we have 32% of the world's population and 98.5% of the world's great achievements. That's disproportionate.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In several decisions over recent years, the Supreme Court has consistently ruled that it is unconstitutional for the government to encourage religion. Did our Founding Fathers agree with this? Consider the words of Henry Laurens, a signer of the Constitution and a President of Congress. Henry Laurens declared, "I had the honor of being one who framed that Constitution. In order effectually to accomplish these great ends set forth in the Constitution, it is especially the duty of those who bear rule to promote and encourage respect for God and virtue, and to discourage every degree of vice and immorality." Founding Father Henry Laurens believed that the goals of the Constitution could not be fulfilled apart from a fear and a respect for God, and that it was therefore the duty of government to encourage this among the people.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact Wall Builders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
That's exactly it. It's the Bible that produces all these things. I'll show you some of that as we go through. I'll just mention Matthew Maury right now, the father of oceanography. Matthew Maury, sailor, ship captain, was reading in Psalm 8:8 where God talked about the paths in the sea. He goes, paths and paths and paths. There's got to be paths in the sea. And he looked and found out that there are like jet streams in the ocean. And he was able to map them out. He's the first one to do oceanographic charts. And he lined out the pathways in the sea that if you could get a ship there, you could cut days off your trip to Europe if you could get in those pathways of the sea. Well, it was reading that Bible verse that caused him to do that. In the same way, you have Harvey, who discovered blood. He was reading in Leviticus 17, verses 11 and 14, about how the life is in the blood. Prior to the time that he found out the circulation of blood was going on, doctors knew there was blood. They just didn't really know what it did. If you go back to Georgia, and let me tell you up front, we're very blessed. We own about 100,000 documents from before 1812. I have thousands of documents signed by the guys who did the Declaration, Constitution, etc. And I have the death not certificate, but the death account of George Washington, how he became sick, how the 3 doctors were called in. First one doctor was called in. He thought it was too serious for him. He brought 2 other doctors in. 3 got there. And they found that George Washington had what we would call strep throat. They called it quinsy and some other things. And so they treated him for the strep throat. And in treating him for the strep throat, he had a high fever, which goes with strep throat. And they believed that fever was an excitement of the blood. And the way you got rid of fever was to get rid of some blood. They drained 6 pints of blood out of George Washington. Now, that'll kill you. And by the way, if that didn't, they also gave him some some oral doses of mercury, and that'll also kill you. Medicine was really good back then. So, nonetheless, they didn't know much about blood, but then you get a guy who reads in Leviticus and he says, hey, the life's in the blood. He found out about the circulation of blood and what blood does and how it moves oxygen around and takes poison out. It's just stuff that wasn't known. And that's what's significant is those who have done really good things, typically you'll find that they got what they did out of the Bible. I love the way that Booker T. Washington said it. Booker T. Washington, Tuskegee University, said, no man can read the Bible and be lazy. He says Christianity increases a man's wants and therefore increases his capacity for hard work. The more you get in the scriptures, the more you say, I haven't thought of that. That's a good idea. I can do that. And it just kind of drives you forward. And that's why you find in places where the Bible is active and alive, your productivity is higher, your economic output is higher, your prosperity is higher. That's what drives. And so that's always been part of our history. We knew that. And that history of the Bible has been very closely tied to America. And again, just staying with presidents, if I take a president like Andrew Jackson very clearly declared, he said, the Bible is the rock on which our republic rests. Now, I don't think most Christians today could tell you why, but we could back then. We could tell you exactly what the Bible produced in the way of our culture. Matter of fact, going back to Teddy Roosevelt for a moment, Teddy said this. He says, the teachings of the Bible are so interwoven and entwined with our civic and social life, not our spiritual life, our civic and social life, it'd be impossible for us to figure what life would be if these teachings were removed. Quite frankly, if we took out the institutions that were formed by the Bible that we don't even recognize as being formed by the Bible today, we would no longer recognize the country. If you go back in history to the very beginning, back in 1606 through 1620s, the development of the free market economic system came out of 1 Timothy 5:8, 2 Thessalonians 3:10, came out of Matthew 20, Matthew 25, and Luke 19. 5 passages created the most prosperous economic system in the world. You'll find that passages like Proverbs 1:7 were cited as the reason that we started public schools. You'll find that when we created our form of government, there are 7 different forms of government. We don't have a parliamentary system. We don't have a democracy. We don't have an oligarchy. We have a republic that comes directly out of Exodus 18:21, Deuteronomy 1:15-16. Those verses were cited when they created the forms of government back in the very beginning, cited in the original Constitution of Connecticut, for example, 1638. So all this stuff goes back to Bible-based, and that's what he's saying. We wouldn't even recognize life today if we took out what the Bible has produced in America. Now, what the Bible has produced in America is a very stable, very prosperous nation. You look at where we are, and having celebrated 235 years under the same piece of paper, try to find another nation in the world that has 235 years under the same piece of paper. We have 192 nations at the UN this year, and that number goes up and down every year. It depends on who's had a war, who's had a revolution, who's taken someone else. But when you look even across Europe, you take Europe and take France, for example, they've had 15 constitutions while we've had 1. If you move over to Poland, Poland has had 7 constitutions since 1919. That means you can be alive in Poland and live through 7 revolutions. We don't think like that. It never crossed our mind when we came through those back doors to decide what tables we're going to dive under if rebel forces come in here and start spraying us. It doesn't cross our mind, but hundreds of millions have to worry about that on a regular basis. If you go over to Russia, the far right, they've had 4 constitutions since 1917. You get off the map to Afghanistan over here. Afghanistan's had 5 constitutions since 1923. We're stable. We got 1 document. We've been there 235 years. We also have prosperity. We're a very small nation population-wise. We're 4% of the world's population, but we have 32% of the world's wealth. 32% of the world's GDP from 4% of the population. And it's not because we have greater natural resources, because you have South America, you have Africa, all have greater natural resources, but we've been able to take what we have and make it produce. And that's the thing about the Bible. You can't read the Bible and be lazy. And so as we were a Bible culture, it produced more and more, and it's created, we are so prosperous now we don't even realize it. But according to figures from the U.S. Census Bureau, the Census Bureau tells us that if you live below the poverty level in America, which we don't want anyone living below poverty level, but the Census Bureau says if you happen to live below the poverty level in America, you're more likely to own a telephone, a television, you're more likely to have an air conditioner, an automobile, you're more likely to eat more red meat, and you're more likely to have more square footage of living space than the average middle class in Europe. Did you get that? Poverty in America is ranked higher than middle class in Europe. Now, interestingly, poverty in the world is defined as income of $1 a day. 1.3 billion people in the world live in poverty, make $1 a day or less. In America, it's defined as $24 a day, standard 24 times higher than the rest of that's why so much of the rest of the world wants to come to America and just live in poverty. I mean, if they live in poverty here, it's elevated their lifestyle. We just don't realize how blessed we are. Now, this is called American exceptionalism. It was a term that was given us in 1831 by French historian and political figure Alexis de Tocqueville. But today in our textbooks, when we say